October's greetings. I'm your host, Dr. Wolfula, and when I'm not waiting for a camp prank to go wrong so I can have an excuse to kill everyone around me in revenge, I'm here at Camp October reviewing movies. Welcome to Camp October, my spooky summer camp during the Halloween season.
I still don't understand why you decided to open a summer camp during autumn.
Well, goulash, if you think about it, the Halloween season is sort of like summer for horror fans.
I don't think that's true. I think the Halloween season is just the Halloween season for horror fans.
I don't need to hear any of your criticism. You're here at Camp October to work, not talk shit.
Okay.
Speaking of which, have the campers arrived?
It looks like the buses are arriving right now, sir.
Excellent. Greet our young guests, and I want to see smiles, goulash. Good enough. That was Goulash, my zombified servant, and the head counselor of Camp October. We'll be checking in on him from time to time to see how things are going at Camp October. For those of you whose parents didn't mail me a cashier's check for $20,000 to physically attend Camp October, don't worry. To keep you included, I'll be sharing some spooky campfire stories with you. And by campfire stories, I mean reviews of horror movies that sound like they could be campfire stories. And what better movie to start Camp October out with than The Burning? Released in 1981 and directed by Tony Malum, a camp slasher film itself inspired by a real-life urban legend and created by real-life monsters. The Burning was also released under the title Cropsy, the name of the film's killer, who is himself loosely inspired by the Cropsy maniac myth local to Staten Island. As the legend goes, Cropsy was blamed for a series of real killings and kidnappings of children in New York during the 1970s. According to the urban legend, Cropsy was a lunatic who murdered his family and was locked away, only to escape and hide out in the abandoned Willowbrook mental institution. And Cropsy would emerge at night and prowl the streets looking for kids to prey on, wielding an axe.
His name was Cropsy.
When terrifying things long go unexplained in a community, to make sense of it all, people will try to explain it all through ghost stories to both terrify kids, but also warn them of the unknown dangers lurking in this world.
Now, this Cropsy was a sadist. I mean, he got real pleasure out of hurting people.
The real murders and abductions blamed on the fictional Cropsy were eventually attributed to Andre Rand, who didn't necessarily live in the Willowbrook Institute, but he did work there as an orderly at one point. Rand was ultimately only convicted on 2 kidnapping charges. Despite claims by fellow inmates that Rand confessed to murder while in prison, the courts could never make the charges of his suspected murders stick. The bodies of Rand's suspected other victims were either never found, or there was no evidence linking Rand to the murders. Even after Rand was apprehended, urban legends continued to emerge surrounding him. That he didn't work alone, that he was a Satanist who offered his victims as sacrifices, or that Rand was part of a network of insane homeless people kidnapping kids. Whether or not he is Cropsy, Andre Rand is the darker side of every urban legend. An urban legend might scare you, but it's usually something easy to understand with a convenient explanation. Behind that story, there's usually a complicated truth with no satisfying definitive conclusions.
I will return! I will have my revenge!
The Burning itself is very, very loosely based on the Cropsy mythos. Maybe there was another version of the urban legend that the filmmakers heard, but for all intents and purposes, it seems like only the Cropsy name was used for The Burning to vaguely anchor the film with some familiar mythos. The Burning is really a summer camp slasher film, and because of that, it has been unfavorably compared to the Friday the 13th films, which beat it to the punch, but the producers of The Burning started developing the film a year before Friday the 13th was released. It was the dawn of the slasher movie boom following Halloween's success, so there were just a lot of independent filmmakers scrambling to take advantage of the subgenre's popularity, and consequently you ended up with some coincidentally similar slasher movies. That said, I definitely need to mention the real-life monsters who got The Burning made. The Burning was the first film that Harvey Weinstein ever produced. It established his production company Miramax, which he co-founded alongside his brother Bob Weinstein. And the two have since become boogeymen that haunted and terrorized Hollywood, much in the way Cropsy haunted their home state of New York. If the Weinstein brothers just produced The Burning, that'd be one thing. They also founded Dimension Films. Their names are all over classic horror films films like Scream. They were unfortunately involved with a lot of great movies, but the Weinsteins also co-wrote The Burning, so their gross influence is evident in the script, even if you weren't aware they were involved.
No, get away! Get away from me, please!
You might think, well, this was the Weinsteins' first movie. Surely they weren't being creepy this far back. And unfortunately, no. Harvey Weinstein harassed one of his production assistants throughout the making of the film. The Burning is where it all began for this piece of shit. Setting all that aside, though, a lot of other people work on a movie and their efforts shouldn't be disregarded because their bosses were dickheads, and the Weinsteins didn't exclusively write the script. Still, the Weinsteins being directly involved with the Burning screenplay does hurt the film in some obvious ways, but I'll explain how everything else about the movie manages to save it with my review of The Burning. But first, I have a message from my sponsor. Me! Pledge to my Patreon today to support the channel, help it continue to grow, and you'll also get access to weekly movie nights every Sunday, and archive commentaries if you miss the movie nights live. Just $5 a month to get a movie night every week. Here are the movies I'll be streaming next Sunday. Pledge to patreon.com/Dr. Wolfula if you're interested in my bonus movie night streams, and I thank you in advance.
If we pull this off, it'll be the biggest number Camp Blackfoot has ever seen.
The Burning begins with the stuff urban legends are made of. Some kids at Camp Blackfoot plot a prank against the mean caretaker of the camp, Cropsy. And it's a totally reasonable prank, the kind of thing you see happen on Punk'd. They put a real worm-ridden human skull on Cropsy's desk, and the candles inside the skull, well, kinda sorta set Cropsy on fire, but luckily Cropsy put on his flame-retardant suit. But it was too late. The burns Cropsy sustained turns him into a freak that even hospital staff gawk at and repel in terror from. After 5 years of skin grafts and physical therapy, Cropsy is finally released from the hospital. Man, Camp Blackfoot must have had a crazy good health insurance plan.
With time, you will adjust.
Despite still looking like a freak, Cropsy tries to see if dressing like R.L. Stine in the Goosebumps intro will be enough to get cheap hookers to suck his dick.
Let's move it, huh? I mean, I gotta earn a living.
But when you reach the point where even a prostitute is too grossed out to want to put your burnt hot dog between her bun, the only thing really left for you to do is go on a killing spree out of misguided vengeance. It's the only healthy option to choose. You'd think Cropsy would go after Camp Blackfoot for revenge, but no. Camp Blackfoot burned down alongside Cropsy. So these boys didn't just get away with burning a man alive, but they also got away with burning an entire camp to the ground. Boys will be boys. So Cropsy settles on prowling around the nearby Camp Stonewater instead. A summer camp is a summer camp. Maybe these campers had something to do with burning Cropsy, maybe they didn't. What matters is that nobody wants to suck Cropsy's dick anymore, and somebody has to pay for that. We're introduced to the Stonewater campers during the ladies' baseball match, and I got a feeling that this isn't really appropriate baseball attire. And I also got a feeling that maybe Harvey Weinstein is responsible for this.
That's prime meat, you ain't buying it.
Something worth mentioning is that one of the first campers we meet in the film is played by Jason Alexander, back when he had thick, lustrous hair. What was once a great society of hair on full display.
You've really lost a lot of hair.
I am aware!
It's crazy seeing Jason Alexander as this sort of cool, laid-back goofball,
Come, Jane, we seek wood.
being so used to seeing him as a short, stocky, slow-witted bald man.
I've had my difficulties.
I should also mention that Jason Alexander appeared in an episode of Seinfeld that was also called The Burning.
Just a little burning during urination.
The episode's plot is completely unrelated to the movie, though, with no Cropsy in sight, so it seems like it was just a wild coincidence.
All right, that's it for me! Good, everybody!
The Burning wasn't just Jason Alexander's first movie, though. Holly Hunter has an extremely minor role as well, and Fisher Stevens plays Woodstock. Man, could you imagine Fisher Stevens playing Woodstock? That would have been incredible. Better than Sha-Na-Na, even.
Woodstock, you scared the shit out of me.
The oldest campers are eventually taken canoeing down Devil's Creek,
Some of you older ones are leaving tomorrow for a 3-day canoe trip to Devil's Creek.
which disappointingly contains regular water instead of damned souls burning for all eternity. Nothing devil about this creek at all.
Now, this camp had a caretaker, a really evil bastard.
That night at the other side of the creek, Camp Counselor Chad tells the legend of Cropsy.
They never found his body. He survived.
which culminates in a prank involving a fake Cropsy that looks like Clint Howard. This scene is very coincidentally similar to the campfire story told about Jason's legend in Friday the 13th Part 2, which came out the same week as The Burning. It's eerie how closely the two scenes mirror each other.
He lives on whatever he can catch.
He's stealing what he needs, living off wild animals and vegetation.
Friday the 13th Part 2, opening ahead of The Burning, ended up kicking The Burning's ass at the box office, but I will say, The Burning's campfire scene is at least more effective in its execution than the scene in Friday the 13th Part 2. Todd's legend of Cropsy ends up being a lot more than just a legend when the man himself starts to show up brandishing a pair of shears, and he's not here to prune some hedges. The Burning is a departure from most slasher movies around this time in that it doesn't really have a clear main character. The girl or sometimes guy you're rooting for. For all we know, the main character could be Jason Alexander. He gets like the most dialogue early on.
That's the world bantamweight jerk-off champ over there, huh?
Initially, there isn't even a clear idea of who the main characters are. We're kind of just shown scenes with big crowds of campers, and eventually you get an idea of who the main roster of characters are.
And I'm talking to her.
Hey, I'm talking to her. Can I talk to her too?
This unstructured approach to the cast of characters makes it pretty difficult to be engaged with these scenes in between the killings, but it does simultaneously feel more organic, documentary-like. Like these are just real campers and we're spying on their everyday lives.
Looking at girly magazines. You ought to try the real thing sometimes, man. Let me tell you that.
The characters are weakly written, but it does feel like the cast is just having fun playing themselves, and because there isn't really a central character, it makes it harder to predict who will live and who will die in this movie. You might have assumptions of who will live based on slasher cliches, but really, watching this movie for the first time, it's up in the air who will die, and it might not be the characters you really wanted to die.
You're a weirdo, man.
The closest to a central character in The Burning is Alfred, and he's established in a very questionable way if you didn't know the Weinsteins wrote this film.
Hey, Sally. High five.
Sally here takes a shower, and Alfred pulls a prank on her by watching her take a shower. A camp counselor, Michelle, demands Alfred be sent home, but Todd, one of the other camp counselors, immediately comes to Alfred's defense and sympathizes with the little creep.
Just a kid. Kids do that.
Did you do that?
It feels like the movie expects us to feel for Alfred as he becomes the target of a bully named Glazer, who's pissed off at Alfred for spying on girls naked.
You stay away from my girl. You understand that?
And Todd bails Alfred out of this situation too.
Little jerk gives me the creeps.
When was the last time you won a personality contest, Glazer?
And Todd goes out of his way to ride Glazer's ass.
You cause any problems for any kid on this camp, bust your ass.
Knowing the Weinsteins wrote this movie and that at least one of them was a predator during the making of the film, it does feel like there's a strong argument in the film that creeps are just misunderstood.
They're all always picking on me. I don't have any friends.
It isn't just limited to Alfred's character. The horniness of the male characters at a certain point don't feel like the typical teenage boy horniness, and feels more like the creepy horniness of the uncle your parents don't invite to Thanksgiving anymore.
Look at that ass. See that? Oh, yeah.
It just comes off skeevier how the boys are constantly plotting to get laid, trapping the girls in situations where they're expected to put out, aggressively pressuring them into sex, all the same strategies Harvey Weinstein employed as a predator turned Hollywood producer for 40 years, unfortunately played out by a talented cast of young actors.
Get the fuck out of my face.
The even more fucked up thing about it is none of the female characters are ever enthusiastic about having sex. They're always uncomfortable, hesitant, or flat out refuse to have sex.
No, Glazer, no!
And in no other movie is the sex equals death rule more true than in The Burning. The creepy Weinsteinian undercurrent of The Burning really hurts the movie, and the script for the film is just a weakness in general, more so than usual for a slasher film. It's just a very unfocused narrative, but thankfully The Burning is a slasher movie, so you can ultimately disregard the weak writing and enjoy everything else, which is where the cast, direction, and especially the effects are able to shine. In the majority of his appearances as a killer, Cropsy was played by the director of The Burning, Tony Malum, because nobody else held the shears the way he liked it. After the opening, Cropsy is rarely seen. He doesn't kill anybody again for 40 minutes. In the meantime, the film has close calls with Cropsy, we see brief glimpses of Cropsy, we know he's out there, but the movie rarely telegraphs that Cropsy's nearby. So in the same way it's difficult to predict who will die, it's also difficult to predict when the next death will even happen. The Burning is a gory movie that manages to also build up a lot of suspense. About the gore, though, Tom Savini delivered the effects on The Burning, and it goes without saying that the kills in the film are a treat. Some of the best of Savini's career. Tom Savini, of course, did the effects on Friday the 13th and was offered to handle the effects of Part 2, but he ultimately declined because the makers of Part 2 did a poor job explaining how Jason would come back as the killer as an adult.
You'd be gone by now, right?
Right.
For the best, because Savini took on The Burning instead, and is a huge factor for why this film became a cult classic. Some of the kills in The Burning are amped up versions of Savini's previous work on Friday the 13th. The slitting of Karen's throat with shears is just a much bloodier, more brutal version of Annie's death in Friday the 13th. The deaths following Glazer's and Sally's very disappointing sex
That's all.
is a grand blending of suspense and gore. When Glazer returns to Sally after her off-screen death, we're set up to think we'll see her bloody wounds first before Glazer gets killed next, but no, the film deprives us of that, making the sudden impact of Glazer deep-throating a pair of shears all the more powerful. All of these kills are nothing compared to the true highlight of The Burning, though. One of the greatest slasher movie scenes of all time.
The canoes are gone! What do you mean they're gone?
After Karen disappears, the group's canoes disappear with her, so half the gang builds a makeshift raft to get back to camp, only to stumble on one of their canoes with a surprise occupant inside.
Hey, you guys, look over there!
The scene very slowly builds up tension as the group paddles towards the boat. We know something bad has been going on, but as far as the characters are concerned, they're just grabbing their boat, only for Cropsy to make his appearance. The movie sells the killing power of Cropsy's shears by showing them stabbed in the raft in between stabbing campers. A lot of variety is on display in a short span of time. It's an overwhelming scene to process as we quickly see Fisher Stevens lose his hot dog fingers. The fast editing of this sequence sells the gore as real. We see Fisher's real fingers, we cut to the fake fingers chopped off, and finally cut to the burst of blood spraying in his face. The shears stab into a false prosthetic Eddie neck, but in the mix is a shot of Eddie being stabbed with a shear missing half the blade. Seeing Eddie's real neck makes the shears stabbing into and out of the fake neck much more believable, even if Eddie seems to have the longest neck on the planet. A lot of what makes this sequence work is just old-fashioned strings. Savini pulls a string that both rips this guy's shirt and bursts open a bag of blood beneath it, and this girl has a prosthetic strip of skin on her forehead that Savini pulls off with a string just as the blade swings by her, releasing the blood underneath it. When you break it down beat by beat, the Burning's raft scene is no less impressive or ingenious, and when you play it from beginning to end, it's one of the greatest sequences of any slasher film. There are better kills in just this 30-second sequence than most slasher films have for their entire run times. Before I move on to chatting about The Burning's finale, I do want to mention that the film score was composed by Rick Wakeman of prog rock band Yes, and the droning heartbeat-like music really builds up the suspense surrounding Cropsy's presence. And there are also points where the score sounds very atmospheric and European. Like a gothic horror film, a real juxtaposition of its status as a slasher movie set in rural America. But a true highlight of the score for me is when the fake Cropsy is revealed to be Eddie. The track sounds like it could be victory music in a Final Fantasy game. In the end, Alfred attempts to warn Todd about the killer, and I think Todd gets the point. So yeah, Alfred becomes a very early and very questionable example of a survivor boy as Cropsy pursues Alfred out in the woods. We're really supposed to care about the creepy Harvey Weinstein surrogate being in danger? Who gives a fuck? Kill him! Well, Todd recovers from his scratch and comes to Alfred's rescue, and seems to also anticipate the performance of Bruce Campbell in the original Evil Dead, which was released later the same year as The Burning. Man, 1981 was a great year for horror movies. Compared to this year, what were the highlights? Longlegs, Abigail, Late Night with the Devil? It really makes you depressed when you think about it. Oh well. In the climactic mineshaft sequence, it becomes clear that the Burning's budget was getting tight as Todd stumbles on Karen's corpse, which is literally just a still image from earlier in the film awkwardly airbrushed into the scene. Ew. It's here in this scene, though, that we also learn that Todd was one of the boys who staged the prank that got Cropsy burned, and 5 years ago, Todd just looked like a totally different dude.
What about you, Todd?
I'm supposed to believe this dweeb became a Chad in such a short time span? Get real. Todd finally comes face to face with the flamethrower-wielding man whose life he helped ruin, and Cropsy looks like Nemesis from Resident Evil 3. Looking for inspiration for Cropsy's design, Tom Savini actually built a time machine to see what Harvey Weinstein would look like in 40 years. Horrifying! Savini was actually disappointed in Cropsy's final look. Cropsy looks more like he was melted by acid, not burned, but hey, it looks fucked up. It gets the job done, and it separates Cropsy from the masked killers that were common in this era, and Cropsy's unfortunately deprived of his vengeance by fucking Alfred, stabbing the poor guy with his own shears. Nice work, Alfred, dickhead. Adding insult to injury, Todd further ruins Cropsy's face by asking a question, and Alfred turns Cropsy into a double burn victim. Man, what did Cropsy do to these guys? To make the ending extra baffling, the film tacks on a coda that reveals that the movie itself was a campfire story being told to a completely unrelated group of campers.
Every year it kills.
So this guy told a campfire story that contained within it another guy telling a campfire story? Campfire storyception.
Don't move. You're dead!
The Burning was heavily censored when it was first released and came out a week after Friday the 13th Part 2, so it was slaughtered at the box office. The Burning only made a profit when it was released overseas, where it found more success. There were discussions of a sequel that ultimately never materialized. The Burning just wasn't able to set itself apart from Friday the 13th as another summer camp slasher about a deformed killer seeking revenge out in the woods. Still, despite the creeps involved with making the film and the equally creepy undercurrent of the screenplay, The Burning is a certified cult classic through its direction, performances, soundtrack, and especially the gore effects by Tom Savini, delivering one of the greatest scenes in slasher history. Overall, The Burning makes for a solid, entertaining, and memorable slasher movie, just with some gross stuff about it besides the gore.
God bless her mom and dad.
I give The Burning a young Todd out of older Todd.
I asked for lubricated rubbers. These aren't lubricated rubbers, you understand that?
You want lubes, buy your own.
Before I go, let's check in on Goulash again. Are the campers settling in, Goulash?
Not exactly. We have 62 campers here and only 5 cabins with 4 bunk beds in each.
So?
So we don't have enough beds for all these fucking kids to sleep in, sir.
That's why I told them each to pack a sleeping bag. And there are some tents in the old storage shed. They're here to camp in the great outdoors after all, so you and those campers will be spending the night out in the scenic woods of Blood Lake.
I've been meaning to ask you why this place is called Blood Lake.
It's probably because of all the mysterious murders that happened here.
Murders?
The murders happened 2 years ago, Goulash. They're ancient history.
Wait, where are you going?
Oh, I'm not sleeping here. I rented an Airbnb in town.
Can I come?
Of course not. Somebody has to watch the kids. I'm entrusting their safety to you, Goulash. So enjoy your stay out in the woods. In a way, I sort of envy you, but not enough to consider switching places with you. See ya!
All right, kids, let's, set up camp.
This video is made possible through the pledges of my Patreon supporters, and I'd like to give a very special thanks to the kind folks pledged to my shoutouts tier. All of the support on Patreon means a lot to me, and it helps my dark influence continue to grow. If you like this video, like it, and if you loved it, click the subscribe and bell buttons for more vids. Be sure to also keep in touch by following me on social media at Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Dr. Wolfula. While I still have your attention, consider pledging to my Patreon to support the channel and get bonus content like previews, VIP Discord server access, private movie night streams, and credits in videos. Consider pledging at patreon.com/Dr. Wolfula. Also, check out official Dr. Wolfula t-shirts and other merch on tpublic.com/user/Dr. Wolfula. Thanks for watching. See you all next time. Dr. Wolfula signing out.